Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you the 20 most important attacking patterns every chess player should know. I have to warn you at the beginning, some of these are going to be very advanced, only a few are going to be simple. They are all going to be useful for all levels of play, of course, but some of them are maybe too advanced for beginners. That being said, you have to know all 20 if you want to be an effective attacker. Let's get right into this. We're going to start with the simplest one, the Greek gift sacrifice, and this is going to be the only, let's say, popular attacking pattern, which is why I wanted to get it out of the way first. The Greek gift is a sacrifice on h7, and it works because of a combination of these three pieces, the bishop on d3 or anywhere on this diagonal, the knight on f3 and the queen on d1. It also works only if there's no knight on f6, which would be, of course, defending h7, and if there's no bishop on e7, which would be defending the g5 square. And the idea behind this is that you give up your bishop on h7 in order to gain a tempo with your knight on g5 and infiltrate with the queen on h5. Another very important piece is the bishop on c1, which has to be defending the g5 square if there's a queen on d8. If the queen isn't on d8, then you don't need to support the g5 square. There's rain and thunder and dogs in the neighborhood are going crazy. I'm in my mom and dad's place, so sorry about the noises. So this is a very straightforward example. Bishop takes h7 check. Now the bishop really must be taken. If it's not taken, then we do the same thing on king h8. We still go knight g5 followed by queen h5. So king takes h7, knight g5 check, and now we have three variations to look at. King g6, king h6, and king g8. King g8 is the most straightforward. So after king g8, we go queen h5, threatening mate on h7. f6 or f5 do not help because the knight still controls f7, so the rook must move to avoid mate in 1. Rook e8, and now this is forced mate. This is actually the pattern that I would like you to remember because many people don't know how to mate here. One important thing is that if there's a knight on d7, it's very simple to mate. If there's a queen on d8 in conjunction with the knight on d7, then the king is simply cut off, and it's really easy. Queen f7, king h8 only move, queen h5, king g8, queen h7, king f8, queen h8, king e7, and queen g7 mate. Now all of this gets a bit more complex if the king is able to escape on d8, but that's rarely the case. Now, the two more promising, let's say, moves for black are king h6 and king g6. King g6 is what most people play, because sometimes it works. On king h6, we can simply take on f7 and win the queen, because this is a discovered attack, but there's also a mating pattern here with queen d3. And if the queen isn't on d8, if knight f7 does not win the queen, then queen d3 is the way to play. And now there's no way to avoid mate other than to take on g5. If you play g6, that doesn't help. Queen h3 check, and there's going to be mate on h7 next move. So the move we are really interested in is king g6. And there are two ways to play against this. Usually, queen g4 is the way to play. And if queen g4, then of course we're threatening a discovered attack. Just, taking here, winning the queen, and it's going to be mate. So the way to try and defend, is f5. You play queen g3, and I've had this attack many, many times, queen g4, queen g3. And from here, it's really, there's nothing black can do to survive. The king is cut off from these squares. The queen is hanging because of knight e6 check. So let's say queen e7, knight e6 check anyway, king f7, knight c7, for example. Let's say, I don't know, knight b6, bishop g5, queen takes on c7, e6 check, and we pick up the queen. But a more straightforward way to win, and the better continuation here, is h4. Now what's the idea? If they make a random move, then h5 check, and that's the end of the game. King h6, queen d3, and mate on h7 once again. So if they play rook h8, trying to prevent h5, we play h5 anyway. Rook h5, followed by queen d3 check is the end of the game. King h6 only move, and knight f7 is checkmate. So that's the Greek gift, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it leads to an equal position, but you have to remember that the combination of these three pieces and the lack of defenders of the h7 square usually lead to the possibility of the Greek gift. With this out of the way, let's continue with more difficult attacking patterns. I have created a theme with all 20 attacking patterns on Nocti. As you can see here, before you watch the video, you can practice each of these patterns against Nocti, which is a human-like AI, and it's going to play like a human opponent. I would actually advise you to do that, to try and figure out the patterns on your own before you watch me explain the positions. The titles of each chapter in this theme are pretty self-explanatory. So for example, knight hg7, you're going to know what to do on the first move, but you may wish to try to figure out the points and the long-term ideas for each pattern first. So Nocti allows you to practice any type of position you want. You can create themes with, you know, any type of position. As you can see here, I have themes on many of my opponents. So when I prepared for Lovro Čupić, I created the theme with patterns from his games. I don't know, the England Gambit, Exchange Caro Kann, whatever I practice, in the absence of a human willing to play it out against me, I use Nocti to play it out against me. And you can do the same thing with repertoires. So you can see here that I've created, I don't know, 100 repertoires probably. You can import any sort of repertoire you want, play it out against Nocti, and that way you gain experience in the positions instead of blindly learning theory. So if you want to learn these patterns, follow the link in the description to Nocti. If you decide to upgrade to premium, use the code Hanging Pawns to get a massive 64% discount. Okay, this is one of my games. The next pattern I would like to explain is counting attackers. And this can be shown and presented with many different types of positions. But Kasparov once said that if you divided the board in two, so let's say you have Kingside on one side, the Queenside on the other side, the easiest way to see whether you have a crushing attack is to count the number of attackers and defenders. In this case, let's count. So technically, black has a queen and the knight. The rook on e8 isn't really helping. White has bishop, rook, and queen. So we have more to start with. Furthermore, we can bring a knight from e2 to f4 into the attack. We can bring a rook to f1 and start pushing down the f-file. This is my game against Klaus Pichka. I played in the Pula Open just a few weeks ago. And we have to reduce the number of defenders further. Now in this position the answer is really easy because there's a mate threat on g7, so we play f4. And if you have more attackers than they have defenders, then it's really easy. You either remove a few more defenders, you either bring in more attackers into play, or you are ready to break through. In this case, I was ready to break through. My opponent played queen e7. Of course, I declined the queen trade. Here he took on b4, attacking the knight and the pawn on d4. I played knight e2, defending everything and bringing the knight to f4. He played queen f8, defending g7 once the knight is forced out of the way. And after f5, my opponent was forced to give up the knight. And now we have a situation in which I have 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers against 2 defenders. And after knight f4, the game was quickly over. So counting defenders and counting attackers is very powerful. Most people don't think of that. And it's extremely simple to do that. See if you can remove a defender, see if you can bring another attacker into play. Now in this case, my rook on a1 really wasn't needed. My opponent was only defending with 2 pieces. So he wants to go knight d7, knight f6. I played f6, preventing that. You cannot take on f6. That simply doesn't work. And now I have a hook I can exploit, queen h4. I want to take on g6, the pawn is hanging. And after rook g8, I finally broke through with bishop g6. he had to take because mate threatened on h7, and after f7 he resigned. The critical line is rook g7, knight g6 check, rook g6 check, and queen f6. If you take that, there's mate on g8. So this is a very vague concept, but it's an attacking pattern and an attacking principle, to rephrase that you simply must follow in all of your games. Now, moving on, this is one of my favorite attacking principles, attacking patterns that I teach all of my students. And this is the game played between Aronian and Kramnik in the 2018 candidates. Now, I had just started the channel when this game was played. This was 5 or 6 days after I'd recorded my first video. And I remember watching this game live. Aronian played h3, this is move 7, and Kramnik fairly quickly played rook g8, exploiting the hook on h3. So when you move a pawn in front of your king, that creates a hook, and as soon as you move any of the pawns in a kingside castle structure, that pawn can be undermined. That means that if this pawn reaches g4, you will no longer be able to keep the position closed. It will be a double attack on the h3 pawn and the f3 knight, which means that the g file or the h file are opening by force. So let's imagine white had a pawn on h5 and was able to play g4. What can white do? Sorry, if black had these pawns. If white took, we recapture with the h pawn, the h file is open, and white's getting mated. If the knight moves, we take on g3 and the g file opens, and white's getting mated. This was Kramnik's prep. And not for this game, but for some previous game. And he played relatively quickly. Now the idea, of course, is g5, g4. Okay, so rook g8. Aronian played king h1, knight h5 was played, defending the g5 square, and the knight is coming into f4. c3 wants to play d4, g5. If you play g4 here, to prevent the pawn from moving to g4, then knight f4 is absolutely devastating. h3 is hanging. So in the game, Aronian took on e5, g4. If you take on e5, then d4 equalizes. g4, the position is getting wide open. Watch out, your knight is hanging on h5. d4, bishop d6, g3, bishop e5. And from here we can see what's coming. Kramnik ended up winning the game in less than 20 moves from here, but h3 was a mistake which, according to the engine, immediately gave black the advantage. From a human perspective, if you don't go for this, then h3 is not a weakness. So exploiting a hook on h3 is one of the most important attacking patterns in chess. Whenever your opponent moves a pawn, and we're going to have a look at the g6 hook as well, that creates a hook you can undermine. The position can no longer remain closed. You can open it up by force. So what Kramnik did here was rook g8, g5, g4. Now Aronian isn't a bad player. He's one of the best players in the world, especially in 2018. He still got destroyed in 20 moves after a seemingly normal g4, h3 preventing bishop g4. Next up, attacking the uncastled king, and we're going to see more patterns with this underlying theme of one king being safe, the other being unsafe. But I wanted to show you this game. This is Byrne versus Chigorin, played in 1905. And this game is actually featured in Vladimir Vukovic's Art of Attacking Chess. So when one king is in the center, there are certain elements you have to start to appreciate. And I wanted to show you this game in particular because it features all of them. There are some signals you can look out for when you have castled and your opponent hasn't, and obviously vice versa, so that you don't lose. Firstly, if the king is on e1, a rook on e8 is by far the most optimal square for the rook. If the queen is in front of the king, then that's even highlighted even further. And if you have a lead in development. Now, in this case, the solution is extremely simple because there's a double attack on d3 and f3. There's a queen on e2, king on e1, and rook on e8. You can pause the video and find the solution. The solution, of course, is bishop takes f5. This bishop is absolutely immune If e takes f5, then e4 wins the game immediately. Either you lose the knight and the queen, or you lose the knight, or you get mated. So after bishop f5, white continued bishop g5, which is good. d4, d4, and bishop e4. Now this works tactically because if bishop f6, there's bishop f3. In the game, white played queen c4, and the game went queen d5, queen b5, and the final move of the game was bishop f2. Not a particularly strong showing by Mikhail Chigorin. He was a strong player, but in this game he got destroyed. If your king is still stuck in the center, you need to watch out, you could get mated. So when your opponent's king is in the center, you need to watch for these red flags, for these elements that could contribute to a successful early attack. And one thing I would like to highlight here, what black has here is a dynamic advantage. It goes away if black does nothing. If white is allowed to castle and consolidate with something, let's say like bishop e3 and castles, then white's going to be fine. Now we're continuing with slightly more advanced patterns. And I call this the Thorn pawn after King's Crusher. I don't know if you know King's Crusher's channel. It was my favorite channel and the only thing I watched before I created my own. And when I started to play chess, all I did was I watched his videos. He would, cover many games, and he had certain phrases he would use. One of them was a Thorn pawn. Excuse my English pronunciation, but he also would pronounce Mikhail Tal like Macau Tao, and I had no idea who that was. He pronounced Gioco Piano, Gioco Piano, and I had no idea what that meant. I speak Italian, and he would say Gioco Piano, and Anyway, he's a great guy, great videos, and he called a pawn in the middle of a fianchetto structure a Thorn pawn. So this is one of my games I played last year. I played a6 here. And of course, you must not take that pawn. If you take that pawn, I'm opening up the h-file for my rook. My bishop's coming into the game, so you play b6. And now this is a Thorn pawn in the middle of black's fianchetto structure. This is what AlphaZero usually tries to go for when they push the h-pawn or the a-pawn. And this pawn serves as a permanent weakness in the black structure. It's as if white had another attacking piece. And as soon as you move your d-pawn, well, you're basically getting mated. So I was happy with this position. I knew I was eventually going to win. A human cannot defend this. So all I have to do is play c4 at some point. I'll show you how the game ended. I played c4 here. My opponent defended. I put the bishop on e4. It took me a while to break through the blockade, but my opponent has very ineffective rooks. Okay. And eventually, now the knight is pinned on e3. Eventually, the king was tucked away on a8, and now the mate on b2 is inevitable. I want to go queen e7, or sorry, the mate on b7, queen b7. And this was the final breakthrough. So when you have a pawn on a6 or on h6 against a fianchetto structure, it's fairly easy to win because all the tactics work in your favor. In this final position, the mate was very simple to calculate. Rook c8, giving up a full rook, and d6, check. There is no defense to mate. You can play rook c6, I guess, but I'll just mate you. So the Thorn pawn, the pawn in the middle of the fianchetto structure, is a devastating attacking piece, very often worth more than a rook or a bishop or a knight. And yeah, once you get it, it's very, very easy to win games. Moving on, we're going to have a look at the f7 weakness. There's a pattern or patterns for exploiting f7. There's knight f7, bishop f7, rook f7, queen f7, knight g6. There are many ways to exploit this weakness. And I want to show you a game that Mikhail Tal played, where he played a move that highlighted the weakness on f7 and brought two more pieces to attack the weakest square. So you can pause the video here and try to break through to f7. Okay, so there's rook on f1, there's a bishop on c4, knight on e5, the queen could come into h5 or to g4. The winning move is f5, and of course you cannot play e takes f5 because f7 will just fall. So let's imagine you make a random move. If you make a random move, I can take on f6 and play queen g4. After queen g4, there is no defense to the f7 pawn. It's hanging twice. h6 is also weak. If, for example, knight d7, which is the best engine move, defending the knight on f6, then f e6, of course you cannot take with the rook, f e6, bishop f6, knight f6, rook f6, g f6, and queen g4, and once again we're breaking through. For example, king f8, rook f1, for example. So if there is a weakness you are targeting with multiple pieces, it helps to follow the principle of counting defenders and attackers once again. If you can bring more pieces into play and find a way to break through, that's usually the best strategy. Okay, now something a bit more advanced. I've had numerous lessons with all of my students on this theme, the theme of the central passed pawn. The central passed pawn is an attacking asset, usually just as powerful as a piece. So what does a central pawn do? Firstly, it has a potential to queen. So from a human perspective, it's a constant reminder that, you might lose to queening eventually. So your opponent has to blockade the pawn, has to make sure it cannot move forward. But more importantly, a central passed pawn provides outposts. A pawn on d6 would provide white with outposts on c7 and d7. Imagine a knight or a rook or a queen infiltrating the position there. So not just the potential to queen, but the fact that it's an auxiliary attacking piece, providing, let's say, logistical support for the rest of your pieces. That's the true power of the passed pawn. So some of the most beautiful attacking games feature a central passed pawn. This is a game played between Bernd Larsen and Božidar Đurašević. How do you create a passed pawn here? Well, it's fairly simple. C takes d5. Now you're threatening knight c7. And if black plays something like rook d8, then knight c7 anyway, and this rook is going to fall. It doesn't have safe squares. We can attack the rook with queen c3 and bishop c1, and it's going to fall. So black simply must play knight c5. And after knight c5, we get a passed d-pawn. Bishop c5, dc5, and d6. And now let's have a look at what this pawn is doing. Look at these squares. How can black defend? Knight c7 threatened again. Rook a5 was played. Knight c7, rook d8, and queen c3 is a simple double attack on a5 and e5. b6 defends the rook, queen e5, bishop g7, queen e7. Look at the outposts the pawn has provided. Black played rook d7, but it unfortunately doesn't work. Find the win for white here. I love this game. e5. The queen is immune. The queen is immune. If rook takes e7, then d takes e7. And on queen c7, we're queening. Rook d8 check, queen d8, e d8, queen, and so on. Bishop f8 isn't possible. So a central passed pawn is a major, major asset. If you can get it, remember that it exists to provide support for the rest of your pieces. Don't blindly try to queen that pawn. Try to use it as an attacking weapon. Another fairly complex theme, and this may be one of the most advanced patterns, is a timely opening of the center. So when the center is closed, the attacking possibilities for both sides don't really exist. You have to start opening files to activate your pieces. In this case, white's bishops are fairly ineffective, and you want to open up the center to activate your pieces. You want to listen to the pawn structure. So if we listen to the pawn structure, we do that by drawing lines in the direction our structure is facing. So in this case, Black would like to open up the position with f5 and undermine the e4 pawn, and White, of course, wants to play c5. So as soon as you see a structure like this and you imagine these arrows following the pawn structure, it becomes apparent that c5 is by far the best move. This is a game between Geller and Keres, and of course Geller must have known that c5 is good, but he played rook c1, which loses some of White's advantage. Once you play c5, Black has no good responses. So let's see what happens. If dc5, then bc5. And what now? I'm going to get a pawn on d6. It's going to be a protected passed pawn. It's game over. On c5, c takes d5. That doesn't help. We can now play cd6. The knight has to move, and ed5. And once again, look at these pawns. Look at these bishops. Black is completely losing. So a very, very simple technique is to listen to your pawn structure and start attacking by playing the most obvious pawn break your pawn structure advises you to play. It's very, very easy to listen to your structure. Now we're going to have a look at two patterns in the Sicilian. One of them is the rook sacrifice on c3 and the c-file attacks in the Sicilian. So from Black's perspective, and then we're going to have a look at an attacking pattern White has in the Sicilian. So in opposite sides castling, we can apply the principle of attackers and defenders, and the knight on c3 is the most useful defender of White's queen side. This is the game between Kasparov and Movsesian, and the very thematic rook c3 sacrifice works here. The engine says that the position is about equal. Black doesn't have an advantage, but it becomes very hard for White to play. Rook c3, bc3. Now what did we get? This knight could come to a4, it could come to c4. If the knight reaches a4, then the queen comes to a5 and the pawn on c3 is double attacked. This knight could come to c5 or to e5 and c4. So technically, Black could fairly quickly be attacking with two knights and the queen. Let's see what happens. Queen c7 played, attacking c3, knight e2 defending, bishop e7. The bishop is coming to f6. Okay, castles, h4, White is going for a kingside pawn storm, knight a4. How do you defend c3? It's not easy. Movsesian played bishop c1. If you play bishop d2, now I can go knight e5, and the other knight could come into c4. He played bishop c1, knight e5 anyway. You should not take on c3, because if you take on c3, knight c3, queen c3, bishop b2 actually breaks through to your king, so don't be hasty. Knight e5, h5, d5. After d5, the bishop is able to come to d6 and occupy this diagonal once again, if allowed. Queen h2 played, bishop d6, and finally he broke through. I mean, this is fairly advanced stuff, and from rook takes c3 to this almost final position where Black is completely winning, there were many steps that Kasparov took in order to increase his advantage, but the main theme is that this c-file attack in the Sicilian is a long-term attacking strategy for Black. You remove the defender on c3 in order to weaken White's queen side long term, and then you gradually bring more of your pieces into the attack. Of course, it would help if you could castle, bring the rook to c8, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at an opposite position where, Black has the option to play rook c3 at some point. Once again, similar strategies apply for Black, but White has a typical kingside pawn storm that you get in opposite sides castling positions. So this is the next pattern. This is a very famous game between Fischer and Gligorich, played in '59, where Gligorich played what we know today as the most thematic Kingside pawn storm in the dragon, you know, ever. This is in every textbook. So g4. Now, one of the main ideas behind this attack is to play g5, misplace this knight, and break through. Now, there is a hook on h6. As long as the knight remains on f6, g5 is a double attack, so we are opening up the position by force. Queen a5, h4, e6, okay, knight d2, maybe slightly imprecise, but it's okay. In this position, Grigorich could have tried knight e8 to try and keep the position closed, but he played rook c6, and now g5. The position is opening up. You can take on g5 or not take on g5, it doesn't really matter. If you play knight h5, which he didn't do, gh6, I don't know, queen b6 offering a queen trade, declining the queen trade, bishop f6, f4. Now this is a hook, g6 and d6, and once again the position will open up. White's going to win. Against g5 he took hg5 and knight h5. Now, you could consider taking that knight straight away, but there's no need. There's a hook on g6, so now Fischer starts exploiting the other hook. f4, f5 is the plan. Rook fc8, king b1, queen b6, queen f3, rook c5. Now, before rook c5, the position was still relatively equal. In this position, Fischer played queen d3. He could have won fairly quickly with rook takes h5. This is the second part of the pattern. Other than the kingside pawn storm, when the knight reaches h5, you take it. gh5, queen h5, there is no defense. Say bishop b5, f5. That's it. You're getting mated. So the kingside pawn storm is in opposite sides castling positions is one of the most powerful attacking patterns at both players' disposal. Moving on, the hook on g6. Now, in fianchetto structures, the pawn on g6 or the pawn on g3 is the easiest target to undermine. And I would like to show you one very, very thematic game in which White played a really instructive attack. So White's castled kingside, that really doesn't matter. White has more attacking pieces in play because of the two bishops on c1 and c2. So how do we undermine g6? How do we make sure that the position opens up? Well, h4. We want to play h5. Knight d6, bishop h6. Bishop g5, provoking another weakness. White would love black to play f6 because then g6 becomes weaker. Black shouldn't have played f6, but he did. This is a game between Solomon and Chapman, two relatively unknown players. Bishop f4, knight f7, rook a1, rook a7, and h5. That's it. The position is opening up. If you take on h5, I play queen d3 and mate you. If you play g5, I play queen d3 and mate you. In the game, f5 was played, but now we can just take on g6. Takes, and rook e6. And White's breaking through. Black is completely losing. The game went g5, followed by bishop c7, which is an incredible move. g5, bishop c7, I think, yeah, rook c7 and queen f5. So once White managed to open up the position, it was all over. And it all started because there was a pawn on g6. If there was no pawn on g6, h4, h5 wouldn't do anything. I mean, long term, you might be able to play h6, provoke g6, and get a torn pawn position with the pawn on h6. Sure, but it won't be the same devastating effect. Okay, another one of my games. This is a game I played against Marjanovic Alex in Versailles this year. And I want to talk about the IQP structures, and in particular about patterns against e6 and f7 in those structures. So I had just played queen h5. And this is equal according to the engine. Black has one move to stay equal, and that's knight f6. Why is knight f6 important? Well, you have to dislodge the queen, because if you don't, say you make a random move like this. Now I'm playing bishop h4, and you have to start bringing all of your pieces back. If you make a pawn move, well, that doesn't help. they all create hooks. So knight f6 attacks my queen and forces my queen to move back. I blundered the game away here with queen h3. I wanted to keep the pressure on e6. I'll show you what happened. I played queen h3. My opponent played bishop e4, which is an extremely good move. The only move that keeps black equal, or that gives black a winning advantage, because the bishop is coming back to g6 and saving both weaknesses. What I should have done instead of queen h3 is simply queen e2. And now once again the knight must head back to d5. Again, if you make a random move, I'm playing bishop h4 and all the weaknesses are going to cause white to win. What happened after queen h3, bishop e4 was interesting. I was trying to make every sacrifice work. Bishop e6, knight f7, bishop h4, rook e4. It didn't work. What I did was bishop e6, f e6, queen e6, and now we have this typical, attack on e6 and f7, which in this case doesn't work, but I still think it's the most instructive example of that I've seen in a long time. King h8. And now my idea was rook e4, knight e4, and knight g6. Trying to mate my opponent. So I took on e4, here, and if the bishop was off the board, let's say the bishop is, I don't have that bishop. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say here. Then I would have knight g6, taking is forced, and rook h3 with mate. Unfortunately, my bishop is on g3, so after knight g6, hg6, I have to move my bishop first, let's say to c7, followed by rook h3, but it simply doesn't work because my opponent has queen h4 in the end. That's a long story. The point is, in IQP positions, this pawn, okay, it's no longer an IQP because my opponent exchanged on c3, but let's have a look at this position. The pawn on d4, the IQP, provides an outpost for the knight, and the knight on e5 puts pressure on f7. The bishop along the diagonal puts pressure on e6. Another pattern we can have a look at is pressure on h7 in IQP positions, which is something you can do with queen c2 and bishop c2 and queen d3. So in IQP positions, sacrifices on f7 and e6 are featured in numerous master games, and it's one of the most common ways to win IQP positions. Okay, now, the next type of breakthrough is a breakthrough in a kingside position with no hooks. This is the toughest one of all. We looked at g6 and h6 when they are played, what you should do, or h3, g3. What happens if your opponent keeps the structure intact? Well, then it's tough. You're going to need two pawns to break through. This is the game between Anand and Kramnik, and in the game Anand made a mistake, albeit very thematic mistake that ended up working. So the most common way to break through is to play g6 here. Why? Because your opponent has no choice. One of the files must open up. After g6, if you don't do anything, I'm taking one of the pawns. If you take, then I take back, and again, the files have opened up. Okay, in the game, Anand threw in bishop takes e5 because you, of course, don't want to allow knight takes g6. Okay, d5 takes fg6. And after fg6, the position should be equal, but we keep undermining. Now there's a hook here, h5. Now it's very difficult to play black. The best move is g5. It's the only move that keeps black in the game. However, after g5, there's h6. We keep going. In the game, Kramnik lost in a single move. He played bishop f5. And after bishop f5, hg6, bishop h3, rook takes, and eventually queen h5 is going to come. He could have won much quicker with queen h5 here, where if you I don't know. In bishop g5, I can play queen h7, king f8, and queen h8 check, and so on, or rook f1. It doesn't really matter. The point is, once you have two pawns, you can break through with this central pawn thrust. Now, there was a more instructive way to break through I would like to show you, which is another thing you can do. Depending on which two pawns you have, If you have the h pawn and the g pawn, you should consider h6. If you have the f pawn and the g pawn, you should consider f6. So in this case, the most promising continuation was to take on e5 immediately and play f6. And this is absolutely devastating. White's winning immediately. If you move your bishop, I don't know, let's say here, then I can play f takes g7, bishop takes g7, and knight e4. And now the knight's coming to f6 because the pawn on g5 provides an outpost. And if you take on f6, then I play gf6, bishop f6, and once again knight e4. All the squares are weak. But the point is, we broke through. The point of these patterns, these attacking patterns, is to break through to your opponent's king. So when they have an intact kingside pawn structure, you need 2 pawns to break through. IQP structures again. The second way to play IQP structures, instead of going for an attack, is to play for d5. And the d5 pattern in IQP structures is sometimes an attacking pattern, sometimes a positional pattern that simply gets rid of your weakness. But there are many, many games. There's a Karpov-Geller game that's very instructive. This is Kasparov short, and d5 immediately wins the game because it brings all of our pieces into the attack. So short played knight d7 to prevent knight e5. Obviously, there's a weakness on f7. So we don't want to go knight e5 because we trade pieces. d5 provides extra squares for the knight. The knight's coming to d4 with tempo on the bishop, with more pressure on f7. So d5. Now, if this is taken, queen d5 wins straight away. It's a double attack on the bishop and on the knight. If you play bishop g6, I take the knight. If you play bishop e6, I take the bishop and the knight's hanging. It's game over. So on d5 you cannot take. Short played rook c8, but now knight d4, bishop g6, and after knight e6 it's simply resigns. Because if you don't take, I take the exchange. If you do take, then d6, and I'm going to take your knight, queen d7, and now of course e7, and back to the central passed pawn pattern. So d5 in IQP structures is similar to d5 in the Sicilian. It's one of the most thematic attacking / positional patterns you must know. And you might say, well, I don't play the IQP. You do. You play it with one side at least. There is no repertoire that prevents you, that saves you from entering an IQP position, at least in one open. Okay. Next up, bishop e6. The sacrifice on e6, most commonly in the Sicilian, almost always when the king has remained in the center, although we saw in my game against Marjanovic in the IQP structures that bishop e6 could be dangerous even if the king is castled because we have pressure along the entire diagonal. But most commonly, this applies in Scheveningen structures in the Sicilian. The bishop e6 sacrifice is a devastating sacrifice that simply keeps the opponent, or in this case the black king, in the center forever. Bishop e6, you have to take. The knight is coming into e6. First, this is a game between Larry Christiansen and Alexander Wojtkiewicz. f4 was played to misplace the knight, knight g6, knight e6. The queen is attacked, g7 is attacked, the king cannot castle either side. White's down a piece and completely winning. The game went queen d7, rook h1 saving the knight, king f7, f5, the knight moved away, bishop f6, and rook d6, and a few moves later, black resigned. So if the king is stuck in the center, if e6 is double attacked and you can plant a knight on e6, there is almost no defense to this pattern. Now, I also wanted to include knight f5 and knight d5 attacking patterns in the Sicilian, but there were many almost exclusively Sicilian patterns already shown, and I tried to stick to patterns that apply in multiple types of positions, and this one does. So I'm not going to be showing you knight f5 and knight d5 in the Sicilian. Next up, queen-bishop or bishop-queen battery on the long diagonal against the castled king. Queen bishop battery is definitely more complex. What I mean by that, if the queen is behind the bishop. If the queen is in front of the bishop, then it gets simpler because you're threatening mate. But queen bishop could also be devastating. Let's have a look at this position. This is Bent Larsen versus Geller. And of course, you want to get rid of this knight. If the knight's gone, you take on g7, you win the game. One of the main ideas is then bishop h8, queen g7 mate. So Larsen played knight d5. You have to take. Knight d5, cd5. Bishop f8. Geller has to defend g7. How do we get rid of that bishop? Well, we play knight e5, knight d7. He started bishop d4, and after b5 he played knight d7, and the game was over. That's it. I'm going to take the bishop, I'm going to win that pawn, I'm going to mate you. In the game, Geller played bishop a3, which does nothing. Bishop g7, rook c1, and the game finished knight f6 check, king g7, knight takes e8, king f8, queen h8 check, king e7, d6, and Geller resigned a few moves later. So that's bishop and queen battery on the long diagonal. That's one of the simplest attacking patterns that also works on a very high level. I've seen, this is Efim Geller losing to Bent Larsen. Efim Geller was just as strong as Larsen, stronger, you could argue. So once you set up this battery, it creates psychological pressure against your opponent. And they have to watch out for tactical tricks. It's very similar to that pawn on a6, the Thorn pawn, that provides long-term attacking possibilities. Okay, next up, knight takes g7 against the castled king. Kasparov said that the knight on f5 is the strongest attacking piece. I can absolutely agree. A knight on f5 is devastating because it puts pressure on e7, h6, and g7. In conjunction with the bishops and the queen, this is a completely winning position for white. This is Karyakin versus Malinin, played a while back when Karyakin was a kid. Knight takes g7. There is nothing you can do after that. Firstly, if you don't take, then I'm playing bishop h6, saving the knight, putting pressure on the rook, and threatening to infiltrate with my queen. So you have to take. And the follow-up is crushing. Bishop h6, you have to take. If you don't, I take your rook. So king h6, and now simply queen d2. Notice how the king is completely cut off. If the king goes back to g7, then queen g5 followed by queen f6 is going to lead to mate and win material. So king g5, king h5, and now g4. Takes, queen takes, king h1, and you're getting mated no matter what. Black tried d6, rook f6, threatening queen h6 mate and rook f6 mate, rook h6 mate, queen g5, bishop e2, bishop g4, bishop g4 was the final move of the game. Well, if you take with the queen, then I mate you. If you take with the king, I play rook g1 and I mate you, and you lose everything. This is mating too. King h4, queen g5, king h3, rook h6, checkmate. So knight g7, that's a pattern connected to having a knight on f5, of course. Once you get a knight on f5, look for knight takes g7 sacrifices. Next up, h-file attacks in positions where both kings have castled kingside. And I should say that this only works if there's a hook on g6, but I wanted to show you a pattern that I've applied in a recent training game. So the principle of this attacking pattern is open up the h-file, play king g2, bring a rook to the h-file, checkmate down the h-file. It's as simple as that. And there isn't much black can do against it. Of course, it helps to have a French structure which makes black unable to bring more defenders into play. So this is a game between Volokitin and Bareev. h4, rook a8, h5. There's a hook. There's nothing black can do. The position is opening up. Of course, you don't want to take on h5. It's going to be even worse. If you play g5, then h7 is going to be weak. g5 could be one of the best moves, but I just go h6 and, well, that's it. Knight e8, knight h3. So against h5, queen c4 was played, hg6. If you take my queen, I win a pawn, so hg6. Now queen e3, declining the trade. The queen is coming to h6. And the final devastating blow is king g2. The rook comes to h1, and that's going to spell disaster. Bishop g5, rook h1, queen c2, queen f3. And you can see what's going to happen. Bishop g7, king g7, rook h7 was the final move of the game. If you take that rook, then queen f7 check, and of course rook h1 is coming. So h-file attacks with a hook on g6 are a very strong attacking pattern, you must know. The idea is king g2, rook h1, open up the h-file, and line up your major pieces down the h-file. Okay, next up is an attacking principle more so than an attacking pattern, and I think this is my favorite one. This is a game played between Leonhard and Amos Byrne in 1911. And of course, white is completely winning. Why? Well, first, black cannot move any of their pieces. All of their pieces are stuck. Their king is absurd. White has a protected passed pawn on e6, and white has a way to keep going to increase the pressure. You have knight f3, knight h4, knight g6, you have h4, g5. Basically, after something like bishop c2, knight f3, knight h4, all you have to do is play g5 and white's going to win eventually. However, this principle of killing counterplay first is why I love this game. So what's the only potentially good piece for black? Well, it's the bishop on b6. It would like to get to c7 to prevent you from, at least bringing all your pieces into play. So white played bishop f4. Before doing anything to convert the advantage, he killed the bishop first. Now black tried to get the bishop to c7 by moving the knight, and then after bishop a5, bishop c2, he played queen e7, trying to play bishop c7 again. White didn't allow it. Queen g3. Now black has no counterplay. Zero counterplay. We can still play the same ideas. We can still play knight f3 and h4 and g5 and knight h4 and knight g6. We can do all of those things. It's just that black doesn't have a bishop now. Black is playing without a bishop. If this bishop was on c7, black would have a better position. So don't rush. If you're winning, you see that you're winning strategically, but you don't see an immediate way to convert your advantage to either win material or checkmate. Make sure you prevent your opponent from having any decent counterplay. Kill their pieces one by one. In this position, black has zero useful pieces. They literally have no pieces they could do anything with. And that's why I love this position. Okay, probably the most advanced attacking pattern of all, or attacking principle, is switching focal points. To illustrate that point, I'm going to show you the very famous Karpov-Unziker game, the famous bishop a7 game. What Karpov did in this game is he won in the center. He played d5 in the Chigorin Ruy Lopez in the Spanish. So he has a central advantage, his pawn is advanced, more space, better pieces, more maneuvering space, and so on. Then he won on the queen side. And once he won on the queen side, he switched his attention to the king side. So he won in the center, won on the queen side, then won on the king side and won the game. So this is Karpov's most famous move. He played bishop a7. The idea behind bishop a7 is that it gives white just enough time to double up the rooks on the a file, avoid exchanges, and dominate the queen side. This move prevents a trade and gives white time to play bishop c2 and rook e1. So the game went knight e8, bishop c2, knight c7, rook e1. Now white's controlling the a file. Okay, black played queen e7. Bishop b1 defending the rook, and knight e2. White has won on the queen side, has won in the center, and is switching his attention to the king side. Okay, what's white's only natural pawn break? f4. So Karpov is switching to the king side. Knight e8, knight h2, bishop g7, f4. f6, f5, g5, bishop c2. The bishop is coming to d1. The bishop is going to help in the attack on the black king. Bishop f7, knight g3. The knight's coming in. Bishop d1. Bishop h5. Queen d1. All the pieces are switching to the king side. I think this might be my favorite game of all time. Rook a3. I don't understand rook a3. He waited a bit maybe to reach the time control. This is move 38. Knight g4. Knight e3. Bishop f7. And queen h5. And this is my second most favorite move of the game. Queen g6. This is such a sadistic move because if you don't do anything, I'm playing knight h5. If you take the queen, I take with the pawn, and now both my knights are coming in. So after queen g6, king f8 was played, and knight h5 was the final move of the game. Once again, you don't have anything. If you take the queen, my knight's coming to f5, and the bishop will be hanging, and g7 will be hanging. So yeah. Okay, these are the 20 attacking patterns or attacking principles I wanted to show you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. Maybe you knew some of them, maybe you knew all of them, but at least you got to see some new positions. Let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.